Hey friends, tonight we're going to travel far back, farther than cities, farther than kings, into a time when the most powerful force in human life was not metal, or law, or language, but fire. Together we'll uncover how fire became our first tool, our first weapon, and perhaps even our first god, and why its light still flickers quietly in the corners of our modern world. Before we settle in, feel free to like the video and subscribe if you find peace in these quiet journeys through history. And let me know in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. It's always a comfort to know who else is out there, sharing this moment beneath the same sky. Now take a deep breath, let the day fall behind you, and let's begin the story of fire, from start to sleep. There's a quiet moment, sometime deep in the night, when the world falls still and only a soft glow remains. Steady, warm, ancient, fire. It is more than heat and light. It is the heartbeat of memory. It is the echo of a time when our ancestors sat close together, not merely for warmth, but for something far older, for safety, for stories, for awe. Before words had shape, before gods had names, fire was already there. It danced on the horizon in lightning storms. It roared in the breath of volcanoes. It consumed forests and painted the sky with smoke. To early humans, it was a terrible miracle, both monster and gift. And so began one of the oldest relationships in the history of our species. We did not invent fire, we found it, we feared it, and slowly we learned to love it. This is the story of fire, not as a mere element, but as the first tool we tamed, the first weapon we wielded, and the first god we worshipped. From the flickering caves of prehistory to the sacred flames of temples, from battlefield infernos to the quiet hearth of home, fire has always followed us. Or perhaps we have followed it. Let us begin at the beginning, where flame first met flesh. The discovery of fire, long before cities rose and kings ruled, before language shaped thought, there was the wild world, vast, dangerous, and indifferent. In this world fire lived freely. It cracked from the heavens, and the fury of storms bled from the earth in molten rivers, and consumed forests with reckless hunger. It was both a destroyer and a signal, one that early hominins could not ignore. The first contact between humans and fire was not one of control, but of observation. The early ancestors of Homo sapiens, perhaps Homo erectus, were likely the first to encounter natural fires and respond not with fear alone, but with curiosity. Archaeological evidence from Wonderwork Cave in South Africa, dating back more than 1 million years, suggests that these early humans not only witnessed the fire, but may have preserved it, protecting embers, sheltering small flames, and bringing them back to camp. They did not yet know how to create fire, but already they had learned to use it. At first, the benefits were accidental. A lightning strike might ignite dry grass. A smoldering log might be carried from a forest blaze to a cave. Fire drove away predators. Its smoke kept insects at bay. Meat left too close to the flames became tender, easier to chew and digest. Slowly, fire revealed its gifts, but it was not yet ours. The journey from observing fire to taming it was not a single leap, but a gradual process, likely repeated countless times by different groups across Africa and Eurasia. For thousands of years, fire remained a kind of borrowed magic, a force taken from nature when available, never truly controlled. Some anthropologists argue that even the act of watching fire, its rhythm, its hypnotic dance, played a role in the evolution of the human brain. Evening fireside moments may have encouraged early storytelling, memory sharing, and social bonding. Fire in this way may have helped shape not only the body, but the mind. Around 400,000 years ago, there is clear evidence of consistent fire use. In sites like Gesher Benot Yaakov in Israel, archaeologists have found burnt flint tools, scorched seeds, and charred bones, all signs that early humans were gathering around fire intentionally. By this time, fire was becoming a central part of daily life. It is possible that Homo neanderthalensis, our close evolutionary cousins, also mastered fire. Caves in Europe show hearths and blackened walls, suggesting they too gathered in circles of warmth. Fire was not uniquely Homo sapiens' gift, it was a shared inheritance. But how did early humans make the leap from fire users to fire makers? Here lies one of the greatest mysteries: the development of fire starting technology, such as striking stones together or friction based methods, like the bow drill, is nearly invisible in the archaeological record. These techniques likely emerged independently in multiple regions. Once known, they would have been guarded, passed down like sacred knowledge. Imagine the awe: a single spark from flint and pyrite falling into dry moss, suddenly birthing flame. It must have seemed divine. Those who could create fire were no longer merely observers of nature. They were now its imitators. To make fire was to claim a fragment of the heavens and hold it in the palm of your hand. It changed everything. Cooking began to transform human diets and biology. Warmth allowed for expansion into colder regions. Night no longer meant danger and sleep alone. It became a time for gathering, storytelling, and thought. And with that, the first true tool of humanity was born. Not a stone or stick, but a living light. Fire did not just help us survive, it made us human. But even in these early days, fire was never neutral. It was always double edged. It gave life, and it took it. A loose ember could burn a shelter to the ground. A wildfire could scatter a clan or consume its prey. Fire demanded respect, attention, and reverence. Thus, from the very beginning, fire was more than utility. It was spirit, mystery, presence, something not fully understood, but deeply felt. We had learned to protect it, to carry it, to make it, but we had not yet begun to pray to it. That too would come in time. The domestication of fire. To tame a thing is to live beside it, to understand its nature, to bend it to your will, but never to forget its danger. So it was with fire. Long before humanity built homes or gods had temples, we built circles of stone. The first hearths were not monuments. They were modest, simple, perhaps no more than a cleared patch of earth, ringed with rocks, where flames could be safely kindled and coaxed. Yet they were among the earliest true technologies of civilization. In places like Gesher Benot Yaakov in the Levant, dating back some 780,000 years, and Beech's Pit in England, we find blackened sediments, burnt bone, and charred wood, clear traces that fire was not simply stumbled upon, but intentionally maintained. These early hearths mark a quiet revolution. Fire was no longer just found, it was kept. The domestication of fire was not like the taming of animals or the planting of crops. It had no leash, no seed. It could not be bred or fenced. It had to be watched, fed, and respected, always. A tamed fire brought warmth to cold caves and wind-battered plains. It extended human life into harsher climates and deeper nights. In the Upper Paleolithic, as humans moved into colder northern latitudes, fire became not only a comfort but a necessity. Without it, entire regions would have remained, uninhabitable. Fire created microclimates, small circles of warmth in a cold and wild world. Around these fires, families would huddle, children were born, elders passed on stories. Songs may have first been sung here, their melodies echoing softly through stone walls. Before fire, night was the realm of predators, lions and hyenas, owls and wolves. Fire, with its flickering reach, pushed the darkness back. It carved out an island of safety in a sea of threat. The night, once feared, became sacred. It became time for reflection, imagination, and connection. Fire's light allowed the mind to wander, to remember, to plan. Some anthropologists even propose that our very capacity for abstract thought, for myth, memory, and imagination, was shaped beside the fire, staring into the flames as they danced and whispered. Perhaps no single aspect of fire changed us more than cooking. Raw meat is tough, difficult to chew, and hard to digest. Fire softened food. It released nutrients, destroyed pathogens, and made new ingredients accessible. Roots that were once toxic became edible. Grains could be roasted, flesh could be preserved. The theory of the cooking hypothesis, supported by primatologist Richard Wrangham, suggests that the advent of cooked food led directly to the evolution of the human brain. As food became easier to digest, the energy once spent on processing raw vegetation could be redirected. Brains grew, guts shrank. Fire changed not only what we ate, but who we were. And yet, food was never just fuel. It became a social ritual. The fire became the center of the group, the first communal table. Meals were not just taken, they were shared. Over time, the hearth became the heart of human life. To call a hearth domesticated fire is accurate, but insufficient. It was more than a tool, it was a symbol of stability, unity, and memory. In Neolithic homes, we see evidence of carefully maintained hearths, sometimes rebuilt in the same location for generations. Ashes were not always cleared, but layered, preserved, as if the past itself was sacred. Some hearths were used not only for cooking, but for crafting tools, drying hides, and performing rituals. They were multifunctional, but always central. In some cultures, especially later ones, the hearth was considered the soul of the home. Its fire was never allowed to die. If it went out, it had to be rekindled from a neighbor's hearth, never simply relit. This custom may reflect ancient taboos, beliefs that fire was not only practical but spiritual, a living thing that must be inherited, not summoned. Domesticated fire required care. It did not sustain itself. Among early human groups, someone, often an elder, a woman, or a chosen child, was responsible for maintaining the fire. These keepers ensured the embers never went cold. At night, they might bury coals in ash to smolder until morning. During migrations, they might carry glowing embers in pots, shells, or bundles of moss. Fire thus became a lineage, passed down like a song or a name. To keep the fire alive was to keep the community alive. This role, over time, may have given rise to early priesthoods or sacred castes, those who tended eternal flames, mediated between humans and gods, guarded the mysteries of fire's birth and death. But that part of the story comes later. Domesticated fire transformed human social structures. It gathered people, unlike solitary foraging or daytime hunting. The evening fire brought groups together. The circle around the flames became a space of equality, or hierarchy. It was here that social bonds were forged, decisions were made, children were taught, and the past was remembered. Around these early fires, language may have deepened, myths may have formed, patterns of behavior, storytelling, song, dance, became cultural rituals born beside the heat. Fire demanded cooperation. It could not be left unattended. This necessity created a culture of watchfulness, responsibility, and continuity. A shared flame meant a shared future. Even in the Paleolithic, before formal religion, fire held spiritual weight. Lightning had birthed it. Volcanoes had released it. Stars and sun resemble it. Fire may have been seen as a piece of the heavens, stolen or borrowed for mortal use. Though hard evidence of Paleolithic spirituality is scarce, Cave art from sites like Chauvet, Altamira, and Lascaux often shows animals and symbols near what appear to be fire-blacked walls, perhaps scenes illuminated by torchlight or rituals conducted in flickering darkness. Fire was both tool and witness, illuminating the first sacred spaces. By the time humans began burying their dead, fire had taken on an even deeper role. Some graves contained charcoal, burnt bones, or signs of cremation. Fire, it seems, accompanied us not only in life, but in death, a guide to the next world or a purifier of the body. The domestication of fire, then, was not merely technological. It was emotional, spiritual, symbolic. It marked the birth of home, of ritual, of culture. It was the first silent god, demanding no temple, only tending. Fire in early cooking and ritual. Fire was no longer merely a guardian against cold or darkness. As it settled deeper into the rhythms of human life, it became an agent of transformation. It changed not just the world outside, but the very world within, reshaping our bodies, our societies, our beliefs. It began, simply enough, with food. The first cooked meals were likely accidental, flesh dropped on coals, roots softened by wildfire. But soon this chance became choice. Early humans began to roast, to boil, to smoke and dry. Across continents, cooking traditions emerged, primitive and improvised, yet purposeful. Fire became not only a source of heat, but a tool for change, a medium through which nature became culture. To cook is to intervene, to take what is raw and untamed and bring it under control. Fire made that possible. It softened the fibers of roots, peeled back the toughness of meat, sweetened bitter berries. It took the dangerous and made it safe. It took the unknown and made it known. But cooking was never just about survival. From the beginning, it was also about meaning. We must imagine these first meals, not just as acts of nourishment, but of communion. Shared food, prepared over a shared flame, became a moment of unity. Cooking was among the first social acts, one of the first shared labors. It was perhaps the first human ritual, not yet sacred, but more than mundane. By transforming the raw into the cooked, humans began to distinguish themselves from other animals. We became not just eaters of food, but creators of it. In this transformation, we began to see something mysterious, a process that mirrored the cycles of life and death. The raw meat, once living, now dead, was made edible through flame, and in eating it, life continued. Something passed from body to body, from animal to human. The fire stood between. In time, this act would become sacred. The hearth, once purely practical, became a ceremonial space. In many ancient settlements, such as the early Neolithic sites of Catalhoyuk in Anatolia, the hearth was located at the center of the home, often aligned with burial sites beneath the floor. Fire and death were close companions even in life. We find burnt offerings in the earliest ritual contexts, charred bones arranged deliberately, ashes spread with care. In some cases, small animal sacrifices, not merely consumed for food, but placed into the fire as gifts. What was this if not the beginning of religion? The transformation fire enabled was no longer limited to cooking. It became a spiritual alchemy, an offering to forces unseen. In early mythologies, oral traditions passed down beside flickering flames. Fire was often seen as a bridge between the mortal and the divine, between the living and the dead, between the earth and the heavens. We cannot say exactly when the fire became holy, but we can say that its holiness grew from its mystery. Fire was alive, but not beast or man. It was born from lightning, yet could be carried in a bowl. It devoured, yet gave warmth. It destroyed, yet also preserved. What else in nature so perfectly embodied the paradox of life itself? In Mesolithic and Neolithic cultures, fire rituals became more sophisticated. The rise of pottery, itself a child of flame, allowed for boiling and brewing. Plants and bones could be simmered, fermented, transformed into broths and medicines. Smoke became part of ritual too, used to fumigate, to sanctify, to carry prayers to the sky. In time, fire rituals were performed not just in the home, but in sacred spaces. Caves deep underground, where torches were the only light. Hilltops, where signal fires were lit against the stars. Forest clearings where controlled burns made way for planting and hunting. Fire was not merely used, it was summoned, called upon, spoken to. Archaeological sites across the Near East, the Balkans, and Central Europe reveal ceremonial hearths separate from domestic ones, burn layers that show repeated offerings, pits filled with charcoal and animal bone, set apart from living quarters. Even early temples, such as those found in Gobekli Tepe, show signs of fire having played a role in the gatherings there. Smoke and symbol intertwined. Fire was also used in rites of passage. Initiation ceremonies often included the element of flame, young men jumping over bonfires, girls anointed with smoke. To pass through fire was to be changed, purified, proven, reborn. This belief would echo through countless traditions to come, from the Zoroastrian purification flames of Persia to the Vedic fire altars of ancient India. Among many ancient peoples, fire was not merely symbolic of transformation, it was the transformer itself, a divine agent. Some of the oldest proto religious practices appear to involve cremation. As early as 20,000 years ago, we find burned human remains arranged in patterns, sometimes accompanied by beads or ochre. To burn the dead was not only a practical disposal, it was a rite, a way of releasing the spirit, of ensuring its journey beyond. Fire marked the boundary between worlds. The role of fire in burial rites suggests something profound, that fire was not just life giving, but life transcending. It could guide the soul, it could cleanse the remains, it could stand witness as the body was returned, not to earth, but to ash, to sky. In later millennia, this would become formalized into religion. Vesta's eternal flame in Rome, the sacred fire of Hestia in Greek homes, the fire altars of the Aryan priests in the Rig Veda, the ceremonial flames of the Zoroastrians, never allowed to extinguish. In all of these, we see echoes of a much older reverence, born not in temples, but in the flickering light of cave and camp. But even before the gods had names, fire was already sacred, to cook, to cleanse, to sacrifice, to remember. These were all functions of the flame. Fire was the medium through which the visible and invisible worlds touched. Its presence became symbolic of continuity, of connection. A flame passed from generation to generation, like memory, like blood. In some cultures, newlyweds would light a new fire from their parents' hearth, symbolizing the founding of a new lineage. In others, the communal fire was kept burning day and night, a symbol of the tribe's shared breath, its beating heart. In myths, fire is often stolen, a secret, a gift from the divine. But in practice, fire was not just a gift, it was a responsibility. To tend the fire was to uphold an unbroken chain between ancestors and descendants. It was to guard the light of the world. Fire, then, was no longer simply something we used, it was something we served. Fire in myth and the birth of gods. Long before the first priest spoke a name into the smoke, fire had already become divine. What began as a simple tool, warmth, light, protection, grew into something else. As our ancestors tamed the flame, they began to see in it not just a source of power, but a presence, something alive, something watching, something that could hear. And as fire lit our nights, it also ignited our myths. Across continents and civilizations, fire is never far from origin stories. It is the spark of life, the breath of the gods, the secret that separated humanity from beasts. In nearly every culture, fire is treated not only as a substance, but as a being, a gift, a curse, a god. It is perhaps the oldest of all sacred forces. The theft of fire. In many mythologies, fire was not simply discovered, it was stolen. In ancient Greece, it was the Titan Prometheus who defied Zeus and gave fire to mankind. He crept into Olympus, lit a fennel stalk from the divine flame, and delivered it to earth. For this crime, he was bound to a rock, his liver torn daily by an eagle. His punishment was eternal, as was the gift he gave. Fire here is more than warmth. It is rebellion. It is a knowledge. The flame Prometheus brings is the first act of defiance in Western myth, a challenge to the gods, a declaration that humanity would not be kept in darkness. Artifacts from classical Greece, black figure amphorae, craters, and kylixes show Prometheus with torch or staff in hand, sometimes pursued by divine avengers. These depictions, dating from the 6th century BCE, are among the earliest artistic attempts to fix the fire myth in visual form. In them, we see the spark of enlightenment and danger. Similar stories unfold elsewhere. Among the Polynesians, Maui, a trickster demigod, snatches fire from the fingernails of the fire goddess Mahuika. In Native American traditions, the raven or coyote often plays the role of thief, stealing fire from the sky people or spirits beneath the earth. In India's Rigveda, fire is not stolen but summoned. Agni, the fire god, is born again and again with each ritual kindling. He is called the tongue of the gods, through whom offerings pass. Fire becomes the bridge between earth and heaven, priest and deity. It is not just divine, it is the divine communicator. These stories suggest a universal truth, that fire, once a wild and heavenly thing, had to be claimed, taken, tamed, and in doing so we crossed a threshold. We entered a covenant with the cosmos, one that carried both gift and responsibility. Fire as deity. As cultures grew more complex, fire moved from myth to worship. It became not just a story, but a shrine. In ancient Iran, fire was the central element of Zoroastrianism, one of the world's oldest monotheistic religions. Fire was not a god itself, but the pure symbol of Asha, truth, order, divine light. Temples were built around sacred flames, some of which have burned for centuries. The greatest of these, the Atash Beram, literally fire of victory, required the purification and unification of 16 types of flame, from a lightning bolt, a baker's oven, a potter's kiln, even a funeral pyre. These were ritually gathered, cleansed, and combined in a temple fire that would never be allowed to die. The Zoroastrian fire temple is not metaphor, it is physical. Many still stand, their altars marked by soot and gold, ash and incense. Within them, white-clad priests tend the flame with precision and reverence, as their ancestors did over 2,000 years ago. In Vedic India, fire, Agni, was one of the most important deities in the pantheon. He's addressed in over 200 hymns of the Rig Veda, often as the first god invoked. Ritual fire altars, called yajnas, were geometrically designed, built from brick, and aligned with celestial patterns. The offerings, clarified butter, ghee, barley, and soma, were cast into the flame, which was believed to carry them to the gods. Remnants of these fire altars have been excavated at sites like Kalibangan, and Lothal in the Indus Valley and post Harappan settlements. Some show signs of repeated burning, charred layers, and carefully laid hearth structures, the architectural echo of sacred ceremony. Fire in this context was not just symbolic, it was active, a living presence in the ritual space. Hearth and temple, even in domestic life, fire took on sacred dimensions. In ancient Greece, the goddess Hestia ruled over the hearth. She was not often depicted in sculpture or painting, perhaps because her presence was already assumed in every home. A small, continually burning flame marked her dwelling. Every meal, every birth, every gathering began and ended with her fire. In Rome, her cult evolved into the Vestales, priestesses who guarded the eternal flame in the Temple of Vesta. This fire represented not just a deity, but the soul of the Roman state. If it went out, it was an omen of disaster. Only the Vestal virgins could tend it, and their chastity was bound to the purity of the flame. Excavations of the Roman Forum reveal the remains of Vesta's temple, a circular structure mirroring the form of the early domestic hearth. The altar itself still bears signs of ancient fire and ash. Here we see a transformation from cooking fire to civic religion, from home to empire. Fire had become political, sacred, fire and the dead. As fire brought warmth and nourishment in life, so too did it accompany us in death. Cremation is one of the oldest funeral practices in human history. From the ancient Vedic pyres to Viking ship burnings, the idea of returning the body to flame has long held spiritual meaning. Fire purifies, it releases, it transforms the mortal into the immortal. In the Nordic world, burial mounds filled with ashes, charcoal, and fused glass tell of ceremonial fires that consume not just bodies, but armor, jewelry, and offerings, everything sent with the dead to the afterlife. In Eastern Europe, Slavic tribes believed that cremation freed the soul from earthly bounds and protected the living from restless spirits. In many cases, fires were kept burning for days after death, to guide, to guard, to grieve. Archaeological finds across Scandinavia and the Baltics show large communal pyres, some enclosed within stone circles, others placed atop hills visible from far and wide. In them we see the ceremonial power of fire elevated to its highest moment, the moment of farewell. Even today, in places like Varanasi, India, the sacred flames of the cremation ghats burn ceaselessly along the banks of the Ganges. The belief endures that through fire the soul finds its path, the eternal flame. In nearly every culture, we find the idea of the eternal flame, a fire that must never go out. Sometimes it is a hearth passed from mother to daughter. Sometimes it is a civic flame, as in ancient Rome or modern war memorials. Sometimes it is cosmic, the sun itself, seen as the sky's great fire, always burning, always watching. These flames embody more than fire. They represent continuity, of family, of nation, of cosmos. They require tending, attention, faith. In the Ainu tradition of Japan, fire was personified as Ape Kamui, the fire spirit, who mediated between humans and the gods. Rituals were performed daily in front of the hearth, with sake offerings and whispered prayers. The fire was not just used, it was spoken to. In Slavic mythology, the god Svarog was a blacksmith deity, the master of fire and forge, associated with the sun and the hearth. He was the divine craftsman, giving humans tools, weapons, and flame. Symbols like the kolovrat, a solar wheel motif, have been found carved in an ancient wood and stone, suggesting solar worship linked to fire. Sites in Central and Eastern Europe reveal charred sacrificial sites, burned groves, and ceremonial ash pits, remnants of fire rites older than writing. Even among the Maya and Aztecs, fire had its place in the cosmic calendar. The new fire ceremony, held every 52 years, was a time of renewal. All fires in the city were extinguished, and one great sacred fire was lit atop a mountain and carried house to house. A city reborn in flame, fire as mirror. In the end, fire is a mirror. It reflects what we are: creators, destroyers, keepers of stories. It is wild yet can be held, beautiful yet dangerous, necessary yet untouchable. Fire is the first god we ever served, and perhaps the only one we still do. Even now, when we light candles in vigil, or gather around campfires, or strike a match in silence, we echo something ancient, a memory carried in the blood, a reverence learned when the world was younger. It began with a spark, it became a god, fire in war and power. At first, fire protected us from the dark, then it became the dark. What began as a hearth to warm and cook, a holy flame to summon the gods, was soon cast outward, into battle, into conquest, into destruction. When humans realized that fire could not only preserve life but erase it, it was no longer just divine, it was strategic. It burned not just forests and beasts, but cities, nations, memory itself. The first flame of war, before the sword, before the spear, before the arrow sang through the air, there was fire. We do not know the first time a village was burned by invaders, or a rival's grain store set alight under the cover of darkness, but the archaeological record shows charred settlements, blackened bones, and layers of soot buried deep beneath stone foundations. In ancient Jericho, levels of ash suggest repeated destruction by fire as early as 8000 BCE. Tel Brak in Mesopotamia reveals whole quarters of the city blackened and collapsed, not by time, but by flame. Fire in these cases was no accident. It was chosen. It was sent. To burn your enemy's home is not only to destroy their shelter, but to unmake their life, their crops, their livestock, their tools, their lineage. Fire is the most final of erasures, and yet it is efficient. Fire requires no army, just one torch, one spark, one moment. Thus began its long history as a weapon: flaming arrows and siege warfare. By the Bronze Age, fire was already integrated into military tactics. The Hittites, Assyrians, and Egyptians all used flame based weaponry in siege scenarios, setting structures ablaze, driving smoke into enemy tunnels, or launching flaming projectiles over city walls. One of the earliest innovations was the fire arrow, a simple but devastating invention: a cloth soaked in oil or pitch, wrapped around the arrowhead and lit before firing. Fired en masse, these arrows would ignite thatched roofs, stockpiles, and wooden defenses. The psychological terror of fire raining from the sky cannot be overstated. In the ruins of Lachish, 701 BCE, archaeologists uncovered collapsed gates and burn marks consistent with a siege involving fire. The Assyrian army, led by King Sennacherib, depicted in detailed reliefs, showed soldiers setting buildings alight, flames licking upward as refugees flee. The Roman legions, too, employed fire extensively, scorching enemy fields, burning cities in revolt, and using ballistae to launch incendiary bolts. During the siege of Carthage, 146 BCE, flames were used to consume not only buildings, but scrolls, statues, and temples, erasing not just a city, but a culture. Greek fire, the secret flame. No discussion of fire in warfare is complete without the infamous Greek fire, a substance so feared that it bordered on myth. Developed by the Byzantines in the 7th century CE, Greek fire was an incendiary liquid that could not be extinguished by water. It clung to skin, burned atop waves, and was launched from bronze siphons mounted on ships. The formula remains unknown, lost to history, and protected even then as a state secret. Accounts describe its use in naval battles against Arab fleets, where Byzantine ships unleash fire that flowed like liquid hell. Chroniclers write of sailors leaping into the sea only to be consumed by flames that floated beside them. The psychological impact was enormous. Greek fire gave Byzantium centuries of naval superiority, not just through destruction, but through fear. Many believe it was a mixture of naphtha, quicklime, and sulfur, possibly ignited by a chemical reaction or spark. Remnants of Greek fire projectors have been found in shipwrecks, and scorched remains of ship hulls bear testimony to its legacy. It was perhaps the world's first chemical weapon, fire as punishment and power. Beyond the battlefield, fire served another master, authority. To burn someone was to make a statement. It was public, dramatic, irreversible. In ancient Rome, rebellious slaves, especially those who murdered their masters, could be executed by fire. The condemned would be tied to stakes and burned alive in the forum, a grim warning to others. During the European Middle Ages, fire became the instrument of holy justice. Heretics were burned not just to kill, but to purify. The flames were said to cleanse the soul. The fire wasn't murder, it was salvation. The Inquisition, across Spain, France, and Italy, turned fire into a theological verdict. Joan of Arc, accused of heresy, was burned at the stake in 1431, her ashes thrown into the Seine so no relics could be recovered. In that act, fire became political and religious terror intertwined, and in the colonies of the Americas, Europeans brought not only steel and disease, but the flame. Entire cities of indigenous people were torched either as acts of war or acts of erasure. The Aztec capital Tenochtitlan was consumed by fire during the conquest, its temples destroyed, its culture rewritten in smoke, scorched earth. By the modern era, fire became systemic, a tactic called scorched earth. When Napoleon invaded Russia in 1812, the Russian army retreated, burning crops, homes, and cities as they fled. Moscow was torched by its own people, leaving no shelter, no supply, no victory for the invader. Napoleon's army, starved and freezing, collapsed not from battle, but from fire denied. The logic was brutal. If we cannot keep it, we burn it. This same tactic was used in the American Civil War. General William T. Sherman's march to the sea was marked by the destruction of Confederate infrastructure. Railroads twisted into Sherman's neckties, cotton gins torched, cities blackened. It was not just war, it was psychological warfare, and fire was the loudest voice. In the 20th century, fire became industrial. The bombing of Dresden in 1945 created a literal firestorm, a vortex of heat and flame so intense it melted stone and sucked oxygen from the streets. Tens of thousands died not from impact, but from incineration. Tokyo, Hamburg, Coventry. Fire reshaped modern war into horror on a scale unimagined. Entire neighborhoods gone in a single night, families erased with the strike of a match or the drop of a bomb. And then Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Though atomic, the blast began with fire, a sun born on earth, turning cities to shadows. The fire we once worshipped now threatened our species with extinction. The psychology of flame. Why fire? Why has it remained with us, not just as tool or god, but weapon? Because fire is total. It does not leave behind. It does not wound. It consumes. It leaves no relics, no message, no dignity. A burned enemy is not remembered. A burned city becomes legend. Fire does not need permission. It does not ask allegiance. It kills as easily as it warms. It never looks back. It is also deeply human. Unlike other weapons, fire is not foreign to us. We know it, we've sat beside it, we've fed it, and when we unleash it in war, we're not borrowing from gods, we're using our oldest companion in its darkest role. We created fire, and we taught it to kill. Fire shared trade, transmission, and the memory of flame. Before there were borders, there was the forest. Before kingdoms, rivers. Before roads, there were the stars and the memory of how to walk by them. And among the earliest things we learned to carry with us, not food, not water, but fire. The sharing of fire between early human groups was not just a matter of convenience. It was survival, diplomacy, even reverence. Fire was not easy to create. Before the invention of flint and steel, before bow drills and fire plows, flame itself had to be preserved, kept alive, fed, never allowed to die. Tribes that had fire were rich, and those without it might suffer or perish. In this fragile balance, the act of giving flame became one of the first forms of trust. It is likely that the earliest instances of intertribal cooperation involve fire. A wandering group, having lost their embers to rain or misfortune, might approach another for help. In doing so, they came not as conquerors, but as supplicants, and the hand that held the torch decided whether they lived another night. Fire was shared the way some later cultures shared bread or salt, freely among kin, conditionally among strangers, and never without significance. Across the ancient world, people developed ingenious ways to carry fire across long distances. Clay vessels with glowing embers buried in ash, hollowed out horns lined with dry moss, bundles of tinder wrapped in bark or hide. Embers could smolder for days, kept just alive enough to spark again with breath and dry fuel. These fire bundles were not just tools, they were sacred. They represented lineage, memory, and continuity. In some traditions, the fire brought to a new camp had to come from the old one, lest the group lose its ancestral flame. Among the Aboriginal peoples of Australia, fire was carried in the form of fire sticks, lit branches kept burning during seasonal migrations. In many African cultures, especially among the Bantu speaking peoples, the woman of the household was often the firekeeper, responsible for the hearth that anchored not only cooking, but storytelling, healing, and ancestral offerings. In parts of ancient Siberia and the circumpolar north, nomadic tribes passed down fire pots through generations, treating them as family relics. As trade routes emerged, not the bustling markets of later centuries, but humble paths carved by feet and hunger, fire was one of the first commodities exchanged, not in the form of torches or flames, but as the knowledge of how to create it. Techniques for fire making, from striking pyrite against stone to the slow friction of bow drills, spread across continents. A tribe that mastered fire making no longer needed to beg for flame, it could give it. But even after humans learned how to make fire on demand, the reverence did not fade. The transmission of fire remained ceremonial. In many Indo-European cultures, new households began their life together by kindling a flame from the parent home's hearth. When cities were founded, such as in ancient Greece or Etruria, a central fire was lit from the sacred flame of the mother city. The Romans, ever ceremonial, kept a sacred flame in the Temple of Vesta, tended by priestesses whose sole duty was to ensure it never went out. If it did, it was not merely a lapse, it was a crisis, a rupture in the divine order. Fire traveled not just between villages, but between generations. Myths preserved the memory of the first fire, the lost fire, the fire stolen from the gods. Prometheus giving flame to mankind was not just a tale of defiance, it was a story about inheritance. Every fire we light is in some way borrowed. Every ember is older than we are. In some North American indigenous cultures, Fire was passed between generations through ceremony. The lighting of the new season's sacred fire, often aligned with astronomical events, was an act of renewal. The Cherokee practiced the green corn ceremony, in which old fires were extinguished and new ones lit communally. The extinguishing was as important as the ignition. One flame must die so another might begin. Here the flame was not merely heat, it was time itself. Even war did not break the chain of fire entirely. After villages were destroyed, survivors might carry away coals hidden in their garments. After invasions, conquerors sometimes adopted the fire rites of the defeated, absorbing their rituals into new traditions. Thus, fire became a quiet thread connecting victors and vanquished, old tongues and new. It crossed borders more easily than armies. It outlived kings. In Polynesian cultures where island chains spanned vast oceans, fire was among the few constants. As outrigger canoes set sail for new lands, they brought fire with them, not only as a necessity for survival, but as a symbol of cultural continuity. Legends tell of navigators who lit torches from the fire of their home island and protected it from wind and wave until landfall. When they reached a new shore, they built the first hearth with that same flame, anchoring the memory of origin in a distant world. Fire's journey across history is also a journey across meaning. At first, it was survival, then it became family, then culture, then spirit. In the hands of elders, it was a lesson. In the hands of the young, a trust. Around every hearth, the fire spoke, not only through its crackling, but through the stories told beside it. By the time humans invented writing, the memory of how fire had spread was already ancient. But the pattern remained. Fire is never just given, it is entrusted. And with that trust comes continuity, a silent promise that the light will endure, that even when the darkness returns, someone will remember how to make the spark. We did not carry fire only to cook or to survive the night. We carried it because it reminded us of who we were and who we came from. Every flame, however small, is a story passed from hand to hand, voice to voice, time to time. Fire connects the past to the present, not by staying the same, but by burning, spreading the flame between tribes and generations. There are things we teach with words and things we pass on in silence. A glance, a gesture, a small fire in the dark. Long before the first alphabets were scratched into clay or carved into stone, the most powerful lessons traveled not through language, but through presence. The child watches the elder coax a spark from flint and bark. No explanation is needed, the meaning is in the act itself. The spreading of fire between tribes, between families, between generations, was never just about heat. It was inheritance. A flame was not merely given, it was entrusted. In many cultures, to be handed fire was to be welcomed into adulthood, into duty, into the long, unbroken line of survival. Among the Sand people of southern Africa, the hearth was the heart of the family. Children did not just learn how to cook or stay warm, they learned when to feed the flame, how to listen to its crackle, how to read the smoke when it shifted in the wind. In these small, constant acts, fire became a teacher. A child who knew how to care for fire would someday know how to care for others. In many indigenous cultures of North and South America, fire played a central role in rites of passage. The lighting of a personal fire, away from the mother flame, marked a shift in status. For boys, it might come during a hunting ritual. For girls, it might follow their first moon cycle, as they lit a new hearth that signified independence and future motherhood. In some tribes, the flame was carried in a handmade pot given by the elder women and was to be used only for sacred or healing work. To misuse that fire was not just an error, it was a violation of ancestry. the fire itself was alive. It could be angry. It could refuse to light. It could bless or destroy. And the one who tended it became, in a sense, a priest, not by title but by action. In the Arctic, among the Chukchi and other circumpolar peoples, fire was regarded as a living being that demanded respect. Children were taught never to spit into the fire, never to mock it, never to walk around it carelessly. To do so was to risk angering not just the flame, but the spirits who dwelled within it. Stories told by the hearth were often whispered, not shouted, because fire could hear and would remember. As tribes and clans moved, they carried fire with them, but they also carried the stories of fire, how it came to be, who first stole it from the sky, what ancestors brought it to their land. These stories differ wildly across the world, but the pattern was the same. Fire came from elsewhere, from gods, from birds, from lightning. It was always a gift, sometimes a theft, never fully ours. In Polynesian myth, Maui, the trickster hero, captured the secret of fire by trapping the fire goddess Mahuika and learning how to hide her flames inside certain trees. In the myth, fire is not learned, it is negotiated. It is part of the natural world, hidden in roots and wood, waiting to be discovered again. Among the Cherokee, it is Grandmother Spider who brings fire to the people. When all the animals fail to steal fire from the island of light, it is the small, silent spider who weaves a bowl of web and carries a tiny coal back across the water. The message is not just that fire is powerful, it's that wisdom and patience are what make it accessible. Fire, in many cases, became tied to the origin of humanity itself. To be human was to control fire, and to be part of the human story meant to remember how it had been passed down. In some Aboriginal Australian traditions, the first people were created by ancestral beings who walked the land and left fire behind wherever they stepped. Those sacred fires, known as dreaming fires, still burn in stories, rituals, and in some cases real hearths that have remained alight for generations. These fires were more than symbolic, they were anchors. In some remote regions of Central Asia and Eastern Europe, fire temples once burned without interruption for centuries. Zoroastrian fire temples, for example, housed eternal flames tended day and night by priests. These flames represented more than purity, they were lineage. In the Persian epic Shahnameh, fire is not just a force of nature, but a bearer of divine order, passed from hero to hero, from age to age. In Japan, the Shinto tradition keeps sacred fires burning at certain shrines, especially during festivals where fire is used to purify both the space and the people. The passing of fire from torch to torch becomes not just a ritual of light, but a transfer of energy, of history from the old to the new. In medieval Europe, fire festivals such as Beltane or Samhain marked the turning of seasons, the passage of souls, and the thinning of the veil between worlds. During Beltane, people extinguished all fires in the village, then lit a new, central fire from which everyone rekindled their hearths. This act symbolized unity. It reminded the people, we are one people, one fire, one year beginning anew. Even the Olympic flame, born in modern times from ancient Greek rituals, carries echoes of this. Lit in Olympia and carried by runners across nations, it becomes a global act of remembering, a fire from one place, shared with many, a symbol that the light we carry is not our own, but something entrusted to us for a time. At the family level, fire remains intimate. In many rural cultures to this day, mothers teach daughters how to tend the cooking flame. Grandfathers show grandsons how to build a fire in wet conditions. These lessons are often quiet, unspoken. They happen in action, through repetition, through failure and success. It is one of the last remaining forms of nonverbal teaching in a world overwhelmed by explanation. Fire reminds us that we are not the first, that someone came before, that someone kept the flame burning while we slept. And now it is our turn. This spreading of fire is not only a literal event, it is emotional, ancestral, almost spiritual. We pass fire the way we pass memory, blood, and name. We share it when we are ready. We protect it when we must, and we mourn it when it is lost. But always we know how to begin again. We strike the stone, we breathe on the coal, we wait, and we trust. Because someone showed us how, because someone once shared their fire with us. Fire in war and empire. In the beginning, fire was warmth. Then it became food. Then a story told at night. But soon, perhaps inevitably, it became a weapon. There is something primal about the way flame consumes. Unlike the spear or the arrow, it does not stop with one body. It spreads, it devours, it transforms what was once alive into blackened ruin. And so once humans learn to wield fire, they learn to fear it in others' hands. In war, fire became a silent army. The earliest evidence of fire used in conflict dates far back, before writing, before metal, even before agriculture. Archaeological traces show burned villages in Neolithic Europe and Anatolia, entire settlements turned to ash, too complete, too targeted to be mere accident. When raiders came, they did not always take what they wanted. Sometimes they simply burned. Fire erased what could not be conquered. It did not need to be aimed, only unleashed. To burn an enemy's home was not merely to destroy shelter. It was to unravel their memory, their hearth, their sacred center. Fire made certain that what was destroyed could not be reclaimed. As human societies grew more complex, so did their warfare, and with it, their fire. The ancient Assyrians, ruthless architects of empire, were known to set entire cities ablaze as warnings. In their inscriptions, fire was depicted as both tool and punishment. The burning of enemy temples and palaces was not just destruction, it was erasure, a cultural assassination. In ancient China, Sun Tzu spoke of the 5 ways of attacking with fire. In The Art of War, he details how to ignite enemy camps, supplies, and morale. Fire was strategy, not chaos. Its use was calculated. Fire forced movement, panic, retreat. A well-timed blaze could scatter armies before swords ever met. Perhaps nowhere was fire so deeply woven into warfare as in the empires of the Mediterranean. The Greeks and later the Romans made systematic use of flame. During sieges, they launched burning projectiles over walls, pitch-soaked bundles hurled by catapults. Defenders would respond with buckets of sand, wet hides, even human chains to smother the flame. But when fire took root inside a city, it spread faster than fear. The burning of Troy, whether myth or memory, remains one of the earliest literary accounts of fire as a tool of conquest. The image is eternal, towers crumbling in smoke, temples defiled by flame, citizens fleeing not the sword, but the heat. To the victors, the fire was purification. To the vanquished, a vision of hell. Rome itself, despite its mastery of fire, as civilizational force, in roads, lamps, baths, and forges, was no stranger to its dark power. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE scarred the city's memory for centuries. Though the cause remains debated, accident, negligence, or deliberate act, what remains certain is how easily fire could unmake an empire's heart. Nero, in his madness or political cunning, turned the blaze into pretext, scapegoating early Christians and initiating one of the first widespread persecutions in Europe. Fire, once unleashed, required no politics. It leapt walls. It made no distinction between sinner and saint, soldier and child. It burned scrolls, gods, crops, hope. In medieval Europe, fire remained both weapon and warning. Viking raids brought flame to monasteries and coastal towns. To burn a church was to strike at the soul of a people. Fire was fast, terrifying, and left no treasure for rivals. The Mongols, in their relentless expansion, were known to burn cities that resisted, sometimes sparing only a few survivors to tell the tale. For them, fire was not rage, it was message. It whispered through smoke, resist us, and this will be your fate. The Crusades brought holy fire into play. Cities in the Levant were burned not merely as acts of conquest, but of purification. To light the torch against the infidel was to serve divine justice, and in retaliation, Muslim armies did the same. Flame needed no translation, it was the universal tongue of war. By the early modern period, fire evolved with empire. Gunpowder changed everything. Flame became explosion, a force multiplied. Cannons broke walls, but it was fire that crawled inside. During the siege of Magdeburg in 1631, imperial troops set the Protestant city ablaze. Over 20,000 civilians died, not by sword, but by suffocation and heat. The term Magdeburgization entered the European military lexicon, the complete and merciless destruction of a city by fire. In the Americas, colonization introduced a new kind of imperial flame. Spanish conquistadors, after looting the temples of the Aztecs and Incas, often burned the remnants, manuscripts, artifacts, sacred objects. In these ashes lay entire worlds. Fire was used not only to dominate the body, but the past. Knowledge itself became kindling. One spark could unwrite centuries. The British Empire, in its long and brutal span, made symbolic use of fire too. The burning of the White House in 1814 during the War of 1812 by British forces remains one of the few times Washington, D.C. was humbled by flame. But in India, the British more often put out fires, literal and metaphorical. They suppressed local rituals involving sacred fire, fearing the power such symbolism had among the colonized. To control fire was to control myth, and with it, rebellion. In the American Civil War, Union General William Tecumseh Sherman took fire to a new level. His infamous March to the Sea left Georgia scorched, not just enemy forts, but homes, crops, railroads, anything of use. The term scorched earth became part of modern vocabulary. It was no longer about victory, it was about total demoralization. Fire was not just a weapon, it was a policy. In the 20th century, war and fire merged in terrifying new ways. Entire cities were reduced to embers. Dresden, Tokyo, Hamburg. Cities not only bombed, but burned, their skies choked with firestorms that reached thousands of degrees. The atomic bomb, in the end, was not just an explosion. It was a new fire, a sun brought to earth. In Hiroshima and Nagasaki, it was the light of creation turned backwards. Flesh became shadow, shadows burned into stone, and still the logic remained ancient. Fire was final. It erased what needed to be forgotten. But fire in war was not always physical. Sometimes it was symbolic. To burn a flag, a book, a body. These acts sent messages no bullet could carry. Nazis burning books in Berlin. The Ku Klux Klan's burning crosses, an act meant to terrorize, to claim moral fire while delivering fear. In these moments, flame became twisted. Not tool, not spirit, but spectacle. Yet even within these horrors, fire retained a kind of sacred gravity. Rebels lit torches in the dark. Protesters set flames in public squares. Self-immolation, perhaps the most extreme and tragic act of political defiance, used fire not to destroy others, but the self, transforming the body into a cry that could not be silenced. Fire in war is not simply destruction. It is expression. Empires may rise on trade and fall by sword, but they are remembered in ashes. The cities they burned, the temples they defiled, the libraries they erased, and always the question burns behind the smoke. Who lit the fire and who survived to tell the tale? We began with fire as friend, then fire became weapon. And even now in the digital age, we use the same language. We talk of firewalls, flashpoints, hot zones. We speak of conflicts igniting, of tempers flaring. The metaphor refuses to die, because deep in our minds, we still remember. To control fire is to hold the power to destroy the world, or remake it. And when war returns, as it always does, it is not the blade or the bullet that terrifies us most. It is the fire we cannot contain, the decline of fire's mysticism. For hundreds of thousands of years, fire was more than just a physical phenomenon. It was presence, spirit, protector, destroyer, and guide. Our ancestors fed it, sang to it, feared it, and prayed through it. The crackle of flame was once a sacred whisper, the glow a reminder of life's mystery. But like so many of humanity's oldest companions, fire slowly began to lose its voice in the age of progress. The decline began quietly, as all revolutions often do. In the flickering shadows of the 18th and 19th centuries, a new force emerged, mechanical, rational, unyielding, the Industrial Revolution. Where once fire danced in open hearths and temple altars, it was now locked behind furnace doors and iron walls. Chimneys replaced the open sky. Smoke turned from holy incense into the dark signature of industry. Electricity born from scientific discovery, and metal coils brought with it a new kind of light. It was clean, immediate, unbreathing. The hearth, once the warm heart of every home, was replaced by light bulbs and radiators. The fire was still there, deep inside engines, hidden in wires, but no longer seen, no longer felt in the same way. Children no longer grew up watching their elders coax flame from wood or embers. Instead, they flicked switches. Flame became utility. With this shift came a profound change in how humanity viewed fire. It was no longer sacred, it was no longer feared, it no longer needed to be tamed or fed. The awe that once surrounded fire as a divine gift began to fade. What had once been a living bridge between this world and the next was now a tool, silent and servile. Fire lost its voice in our stories too. Myths of flame-bearing gods and fire-guarding priestesses gave way to tales of steam power and electric marvels. The rituals that once honored fire slowly vanished. Sacred flames that had burned for centuries in temples and sanctuaries were extinguished, some quietly, some with ceremony. Eternal fires, once guarded by orders of priests and priestesses, flickered out as faith gave way to functionality. Cremation continued in some cultures, but often now as a clinical process, far from the ritual of old. In cities, fire transformed from divine to dangerous. It became a threat to be controlled. Fire brigades, insurance policies, safety codes, all designed to keep the flames away. In this modern age, we now teach children not how to build a fire, but how to fear it, to stop, drop, and roll. We build homes not around fire, but against it. The hearth was gone, and with it, the stories told in its glow. And yet, fire never truly left us. Even now, in our most private and ancient moments, we turn to it, candles on birthday cakes, bonfires on midsummer nights, the flicker of a flame at a vigil. We still light candles for the dead, lanterns for celebration, torches in protest. There is something buried deep in our memory that responds to flame, not as a hazard, but as a memory. A thread connecting us not just to our ancestors, but to the time before words had sound. Still, the decline of fire's mysticism is undeniable. In the march toward modernity, we traded spirit for efficiency, mystery for measurement. The spark that once inspired myth and devotion was reduced to numbers, temperature, combustion, kilowatt hours. In laboratories and factories, fire was dissected, categorized, controlled. Perhaps that was inevitable. The modern world demands control, predictability, and yet the cost is felt in quiet ways. Fewer of us now know the patience of coaxing a flame from damp wood. Fewer still have sat in silence with nothing but firelight for company, watching its language of sparks and shadows. But fire is patient. It does not demand belief to exist. It waits. In the coals of a campfire, the warmth of a kitchen oven, or the flare of a match in darkness, fire still whispers. It may no longer be worshipped as a god, but it remains, beneath our fingertips, in our breath, behind our tools. In the great arc of history, fire has simply changed its mask. Once it danced in caves and temples. Now it hums in engines and glows behind glass. Its spirit may be buried, but it is not gone. In moments of stillness, when the lights go out and silence returns, we remember. We remember what it is to sit with flame, to listen, to feel, and to know, not just with the mind, but with something older. Fire's mysticism may have dimmed, but it's never truly extinguished. For deep within us, past the circuits and steel, past the measured and the modern, the ancient memory of flame still burns. Fire as a living memory. There's a moment, just before sleep takes us, when the world falls quiet. The noise of thought softens. The room fades into dusk. And in that stillness, something ancient stirs, a flicker, a warmth, a presence that asks nothing, yet remains. Fire. We no longer sit around it as we once did. We do not gather at the hearth each night to share food, or stories, or silence. The flames that shaped us are now mostly hidden, behind glass, behind steel, behind switches and wires. But even now, even in this age of glowing screens and humming machines, fire endures. Not as necessity, perhaps, but as memory. For fire was never merely flame. It was teacher, guardian, and mirror. It watched over our ancestors as they stepped into the night. It shaped the first rituals, carried the first prayers. It opened the world, letting us eat what could not be chewed, walk where we could not have survived, dream beyond the darkness. We tamed it, then feared it. We prayed to it, then locked it away. We made it a god, then made it a tool. But always we kept it near. And in doing so, fire became more than element. It became a thread that runs through every age of humanity. Through the spark struck in a Paleolithic cave, through the sacrificial flames of Vesta, Agni, and Prometheus, through the pyres of warriors, the torches of rebels, the lamps of saints, through the kitchen hearth and the temple altar, through the forge, the battlefield, the story told in whisper by firelight. It's a thread we still carry, even if we do not see it. The match struck to light a candle on a birthday cake. The flame passed from one torch to another at the Olympic Games. The bonfire at midsummer, the vigil flame for the dead, the quiet flicker in a lantern carried into protest. All of these are echoes, small rituals that remember something older than language. In every fire we light, we remember, whether we intend to or not. Fire taught us to wait, to be patient, to tend and to watch. It taught us that warmth is not given, but kept, that destruction and creation are twins, that even in the darkest hours light can come from the smallest spark. It also taught us reverence, the knowledge that not everything can be touched, or understood, or controlled. Fire lives, but it cannot be owned. It must be respected. And in that respect, we found meaning. The ancients were not wrong to see divinity in flame. For fire moves like spirit. It cannot be held in the hand. It dances. It consumes. It changes everything it touches, and it leaves behind both light and ash, reminder and warning. Perhaps that is why, even now, we fall silent before it, why we stare into flames without knowing why a single candle can bring calm to a room. It is not just nostalgia, it is memory, written into the deepest parts of who we are. Fire is a story we never stop telling, and though it no longer lives at the center of our homes, or the heart of our gods, it still waits for us. In the campfire, in the oven, in the lantern, in the silence between one breath and the next. It waits, not for worship, but for witness. So tonight, as you close your eyes and the world fades to dark, imagine a fire burning softly nearby. It does not ask you to speak. It does not ask you to believe, only to remember. The first tool, the first weapon, the first god, fire, still warm, still watching, still with us. And so, the story of fire burns quietly on, no longer worshipped, perhaps, but never truly forgotten. If you enjoyed tonight's journey, feel free to leave a like and consider subscribing for more stories whispered from the deep past. Let me know how far into the video you drifted off, or if the flame kept you awake until the end. Until next time, sleep well, and may your fire always stay lit.